So hello and welcome to our October AmeriCorps VISTA member webinar, Community Assessments, the Heart and Foundation of VISTA Service. My name is Chris Hawks. I'm a training specialist for AmeriCorps VISTA and returned Peace Corps volunteer from Belize in 2010 to 12. I'll be your host for today's webinar, and you will also see our webinar support team, LSI, monitoring the chat and Q&A throughout the presentation. And you'll also hear in just a couple of moments from our lead presenter, Shannon Stover, in just a second. But first, we just want to note that you'll recall from the VISTA member orientation, or VMO, that there are 4 key principles of the VISTA program. For this webinar, we're going to look at the second principle, empowering communities. So in contrast to kind of parachuting in and doing good things for people, VISTA members live among and involve community members in planning and carrying out the VISTA project. This is often facilitated by your sponsoring organization and probably started with the development of the initial concept paper, which is the application that your project submitted for the VISTA project, and hopefully continues through some sort of community advisory group. Strengthening and improving the community is our long-term goal through learning about values and beliefs, assumptions, community development principles, and tenets of good practice. An important approach to learning about the community, its assets, and its needs is through some sort of community assessment. And we certainly understand that the COVID-19 pandemic can make this challenging, to say the least, as it's making so many other parts of our personal and professional lives difficult. And we'll touch a bit specifically on COVID, but it's also important to note that many of these tools and techniques that Shannon's going to share can still be used in normal times or COVID times. So we just want to introduce you to a community assessment model you can adapt to suit the needs of your project and your assignment. So here on the session overview, our hope is that by the end of the session, you'll be able to articulate the value of community assessment as it pertains to your project and service, define and characterize the various elements involved in community assessment, and apply the assessment process to your VISTA project. So let's begin by introducing our speaker, Shannon Stover. So Shannon Stover is a VISTA alum and now owns Verb Exchange Consulting based in Bozeman, Montana. Shannon has been working as a national service staff member, trainer, and consultant for more than 15 years. After graduating from college, she served as both a VISTA and a VISTA leader, after which she joined the staff of the Montana Governor's Office of Community Service as the statewide training officer. Since that time, she has overseen thousands of AmeriCorps members and staff positions with the Montana Campus Compact and Montana Conservation Corps. Shannon currently works as an independent consultant. She regularly provides training and one-on-one coaching to national service members and community members alike, with a focus on assessing community needs, engaging stakeholders, and implementing programs through the use of the community building life cycle. So Shannon, we're super excited to hear from you, and we thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm very excited to be here, and hello to all of you out there listening in today. So I agree that community assessment is an important topic for VISTAs. In my work as a consultant, providing strategic guidance to nonprofits, I found that you won't be effective unless you understand the community that you've set out to serve. I've seen highly respected organizations become nearly obsolete because they lost touch with the community and no longer understood what it needed and what assets were available. Without this key information, it's easy to either keep doing what you've always done, even if it's no longer useful, or veer off in a new direction that also misses the mark in regards to what the community wants and needs. Taking the time to do a community assessment before launching any new initiative is time well spent. So let's begin with defining what a community assessment is. Community assessment is a simple process that is designed to aid organizations in better understanding their community's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A well-executed assessment is an essential first step when working with the community. Your assessment will create a framework for understanding the needs and problems your community faces, as well as a roadmap for identifying potential solutions and a path to use in moving them forward. When we're considering community assessments, it's also important to clarify what a community is. Now, communities are often defined by a geographic area. However, they can also be based on shared interests or characteristics such as religion, race, age, or occupation. As we navigate today's session, keep these variations in mind and think critically about the community or communities you're serving and might want to consider assessing. Suffice to say, taking the time to define and learn about your community will help ensure that you're fulfilling your service term in a way that maximizes your impact. Now, we've got quite a few of you with us today, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about what you're working on so that it can help you better understand how community assessment relates to your project. So let's go ahead and take a poll. Now, in front of you, we have a poll that has a variety of different activities that you might be engaging with during your VISTA service or see on your VAD. So I would like for you to select all of the activities that you feel like your service is working on. So we have community assessment, education and outreach, building partnerships, building advisory groups, program strategy and planning, volunteer management, fundraising and development, and program evaluation. So again, go ahead and select the activities that you feel are represented in your VAD, and we'll see what we're doing out there.
Great, and we'll just give it a few moments to make sure everyone gets their poll question in. While we're waiting, Shannon, I'm going to quiz you. What do you think is going to be the number one answer out of these?
Oh man, that's a good question. So probably fundraising and development. That one tends to come up quite a bit. So I would put that one as the one in the lead. What about you?
Yeah, I was looking at education and outreach and fundraising as well. We're kind of my two, but we'll see. Let's give it another couple seconds as this closes up. And we will close the poll and see.
Yeah.
Oh,
look at that. Building partnerships came out in the front.
Both wrong.
I know. Awesome. Yeah. So it looks like we've got quite a few folks who are directly doing community assessment work. Lots of folks doing partnerships. Chris, you were pretty, that education and outreach was right in there. Not as much fundraising and development, but overall, looks like we've got some good balance. Great. Thank you, everybody, for hopping in there and participating in that poll. So again, I know that some of these activities might seem like they don't have a relationship to community assessment. So I want to take a moment and share a framework with you. And this is a framework that should help you better understand how community assessment relates to all of the activities that you might find yourself involved with as a VISTA. Okay, so this model is referred to as the community building lifecycle. I was trained in this model as an incoming VISTA, and it's been an invaluable tool for all of my efforts since that time. The model is designed to provide a pathway to engage with your community in a way that creates longevity and sustainability. So let's unpack what this image is telling us. Notice that the entire cycle revolves around community need. That's because the success of your project is contingent upon being in alignment with those needs. Put another way, in order to create community change, you must understand the problem that you're trying to solve. Generally, this is the purpose of a community assessment. If the assessment work isn't done, it's likely that the rest of your efforts will miss the mark. For example, I once worked with a guy who was developing programming to help young women obtain their high school diplomas. Now, they tried a bunch of interventions, academic mentoring, job coaching, and assistance with technology, but they weren't making an impact. Then they took a closer look at the community they were serving and realized that the bulk of the population was made up of single mothers. When they asked these ladies what they needed to succeed, they were unanimous in saying childcare. So the program began to focus on addressing the childcare needs of their beneficiaries, and as a result, were much more successful in meeting their goals. You have to understand your community's needs if you want to support them in solving problems. So naturally, the first step in the model is to complete the community assessment. The information you identify here will include, service gaps and opportunities, and determine what work needs to be done, what your community is interested in doing, and what your organization should prioritize. With that information, you can conduct outreach to raise awareness within the community about your findings and what opportunities and threats exist. The primary goal here being to connect with community members and help them understand the issues associated with the identified need and begin to discuss options on how to address it. After raising awareness, you'll bring your community stakeholders together in an advisory capacity. Advisory groups exist to ensure that your planning and implementation efforts are always aligned with the community need and that your solutions are understood, agreed upon, and supported. Once your advisory group is established, planning can begin. This is the time to collaboratively create goals and objectives, build timelines, and clarifying roles. With the plan prepared, you can begin implementation, and this is where we're generally going to see our volunteer and fund development efforts emerge. Now, the success of these processes is reliant upon our ability to clearly explain the needs we're addressing and the role that the community is playing in designing solutions. The final piece is to evaluate the work. This is where you'll measure your impact, determine what's working and not working, and consider any adjustments that might need to be made. Now, the process is cyclical, it's not linear, which reinforces the importance of consistently revisiting the need and ensuring that you're aligned with the community. This is a major component of capacity building, and as a VISTA, this is important for you to keep in mind. One of the largest parts of your role will be to support this process and avoid getting sidetracked and stuck in implementation. So now that you have a better understanding around the role of community assessment in your project, let's take a moment to talk about the community assessment mindset. Before beginning your assessment, it's important to get into the right mindset. First, remain open-minded. Don't underestimate the community. Don't presume that you know their needs or challenges they're facing, and avoid leading with your own solutions. Remain curious and neutral, or important information could be missed. Next, carefully choose your participants. Consider the makeup of the community and ensure you include a diverse cross-section of relevant groups, including gender, age, ethnicity, religion, income level, and vocation. And be sure to include overlooked or marginalized groups such as women, young people, the elderly, and religious and ethnic minorities. Remember that your role as a VISTA is temporary. Therefore, consider yourself an outsider and focus on empowering others. Speak with them, not at them, and encourage them to inform decisions. It's imperative that others play an active part in the assessment. Finally, avoid making promises before a formal decision is made, but assure participants that you'll share what is learned from the assessment and where your organization decides to go next. Invite them to take part in any future activities. So now that you understand the mindset, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves to the community assessment process that we'll be reviewing today. Now, there are countless models that can be used to guide your assessment. Some are really complex and others less so. The model that we'll learn today is fairly simple. It focuses on 5 key components needed for an effective assessment, which are defining the scope, gathering data, organizing key findings, identifying priorities, and communicating next steps. We'll cover each of these in depth in order to accommodate the variety of projects you might be working on. Now, understand that each of your assessments will look and feel a bit different based upon the unique circumstances and needs of your organization and community, and that's okay. While there are certainly key elements and best practices you'll want to incorporate into your plan, recognize that some elements of community assessment are more of an art form and will be tailored to your specific situation. So the first step of your assessment is define the scope. And this step is going to set the tone for all of your assessment activities. Defining the scope begins with naming the problem. Community problems represent conditions in our community that negatively impact quality of life. So this could include issues like child abuse, crime, pollution, health disparities, hunger, inadequate housing, lack of jobs, etc. The specific problem you're working on should be clear in your organization's mission and in your VAD. Naming the problem is simply stating the core challenge in a way that does not suggest a solution. For example, if your organization is working on teen pregnancy prevention, the core problem is teen pregnancy in our community, not the need for sex education in our schools, which suggests a solution. Now, once you've named the problem, identify the questions you want answered throughout the course of your assessment. This part is multifaceted. First, collect additional information about the problem itself. Learn how frequently the problem occurs, how long the problem has lasted, and how many people are impacted by the problem, and what types of disruptions to quality of life that problem might cause. Next, work to identify why the problem exists. Now, it's my belief that these questions represent the heart of your assessment, and I personally like to use the but why technique at this stage. The but why technique is exactly as it sounds. Gather additional information about the problem and then ask why. So for our teen pregnancy prevention example, you might ask why teen pregnancies are on the rise. Why does your community not prioritize addressing that problem? Why are the negative impacts of teen pregnancy so prevalent in our community? Each time you get an answer, ask why again and see what you can find out. Finally, you'll want to identify what steps the community is ready and willing to take to address the problem. This is critical to the sustainability of your efforts. There might be a variety of strategies and practices you can rely upon to address the problem, but if the community isn't ready or willing to adopt them, your efforts will fall flat. You need to ask the community for their specific ideas and limitations. Once you've framed the problem and identified the questions to be answered, it's time to identify the community that you wish to assess. Now, as mentioned earlier, communities can take a variety of different forms, so think critically about how you're defining it. You might choose to use a geographic interpretation, or you might choose to define your community based upon shared characteristics or identities within a specific area. So for example, you might decide to look at teen pregnancy throughout an entire area, or you might choose to look at teen pregnancy within a specific subset of the population or a certain part of town. The community you assess will be dictated by the organization you're serving with the intention of the assessment in mind. After you've identified the community you'll be assessing, identifying the intended beneficiaries of your work will be next. This should include the individuals who will directly benefit from your efforts, as well as those who may indirectly benefit. So continuing with our teen pregnancy example, your direct beneficiaries would likely include teen parents and infants, and your indirect beneficiaries may include extended family members. Finally, identify other community stakeholders who have an interest in your problem. This might include your organizational partners, other agencies and organizations working on the problem, donors and volunteers, public institutions, elected officials, business owners, neighborhood groups, etc. You get the idea. These groups and individuals represent the fabric of your community and play a greater role in answering questions and designing solutions. Okay, so now that you've defined the scope of your assessment, let's talk about gathering data. Generally speaking, there are three primary ways to gather data for your community assessment. You can source federal statistics, you can collect local indicators, and you can solicit community member personal experiences. So let's go ahead and sort through each of these a little bit more. Federal statistics represent data usually derived from the U.S. Census Bureau about the nation's people and economy. Now, every 10 years, the Census Bureau conducts the population and housing census in which every resident in the United States is counted, and this will include issues of transportation, justice, labor, energy, agriculture, health, education, and many more. These statistics can be viewed in a variety of ways and give you the ability to look at what's happening nationally, what's happening in your state, and what's happening in your community. This is advantageous because it allows us to track trends over the course of decades, while also allowing us to compare our community to others and see where we're thriving and where we have opportunities to grow. Now, what we have here is a screenshot of the website that you can visit to source your federal statistics. I mentioned all the various topics that are included in the federal statistics pulled by the Census Bureau, and you might have recognized that many of these represent the indicators that are used to measure poverty. So you'll want to begin by pulling the data for your community to get a sense of what poverty looks like there. You might have even done this if you completed the community profile activity on the VISTA campus. Have you done that one? If not, do it. In addition to the census data, there are countless other federal data sources that you can access that might provide more specific information for your project. For example, I often complete community assessments for youth development organizations, and for those, I often reference the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and the Prevention Needs Assessment, which are both excellent data sources for youth. Now, I try and review these studies alongside each other as well as other data sources to see what relationship might exist, and I would encourage you to do the same. Don't choose one study and just run with it. Do your best to look at multiple resources. So speaking of multiple resources, Chris, what do you think about asking folks to share resources that they're familiar with?
Sounds good, Shannon. Yeah, let's get a chat question going. Get everyone's keyboard fingers going. But yeah, we would love to hear what other data sources have you referenced in order to better understand your community and complete your community needs assessments. We'd love to hear from you, and a gentle reminder to please select all panelists and attendees when responding, because a lot of your answers here could be helpful to everyone viewing the webinar. So we want to make sure everyone can view. And starting to go fast, Department of Education, I see local historians, point in time for homelessness statistics in our communities, local schools, government sites like westvirginia.gov or other government websites. Just look at, wow, it's going fast. And I see a link shared. Definitely, yeah, by all means, share with your peers here. I see the feedingamerica.org link there. Or statistics from the Chamber of Commerce at our local Chamber of Commerce, USPS mapping, the US Census. I know Shannon it's referencing the census in a couple of slides. Veterans.gov, Google, yeah, sure. Shannon, you see any popping up that particularly stand out? I know the chat's going super fast.
Oh
but,
man, it is like smoking. Yeah. No, I'm seeing a bunch in there that are great. So I saw Kids Count and Kids First. Those are great resources. Seeing folks identify local resources, which we're going to talk more about, but if you're not used to getting your local indicators, mind this chat. And interestingly enough, I saw somebody mention Headwaters Economics, which is actually a Bozeman-based nonprofit. So let's go ahead and move forward, because I was going to share more specific with you about that tool, but keep populating that chat, everybody. And I would encourage all of you to be taking notes. So again, conveniently, somebody mentioned this one. So if you've never looked at pulling federal statistics or data before, it can feel overwhelming. So let's go ahead and look at this tool that was mentioned in the chat. And this is called the Populations at Risk tool. And it was developed again by a local Montana nonprofit called Headwaters Economics. And they use this data to inform community planning and land management decisions. It's an amazing resource that was actually passed along to me by some previous VISTAs who know I'm a kind of a nerd about this and knew that I would find it valuable. So all you have to do is visit this website, insert the name of the community that you're working with, and it will generate more than 30 pages of data surrounding poverty issues in your community. It includes information on education attainment, race and ethnicity, individuals in poverty, families in poverty, households receiving public assistance, labor participation, housing affordability, and so on. It's a really quick and effective way to pull the information specific to your community from a variety of data sources. And again, if you haven't gone in there and if you're just getting started, I would encourage you to check it out. It is a great starting point. Okay, so federal statistics and data offer a ton of valuable information to our work, but they also aren't always going to provide us with all the insights that we need around why those things are happening. So that's where we're going to start talking about this idea of community level indicators. Community level indicators represent the facts and figures that we can pull from our community that give us insight into how the problem is showing up in our community and into the unique factors impacting how that problem affects our beneficiaries and stakeholders. For example, if you were working on an intervention for child abuse, you could work with your local hospital to find numbers of how many child abuse related injuries were treated in the past year, or you might work with your local school district to see how many reports they average per year. If you're looking to solve issues of food insecurity in your area, you could visit with the local food bank to learn more about the number of clients they serve and the populations that seem to be demonstrating the greatest need. Unlike federal statistics, which are gift wrapped for us, community level indicators require a bit more digging and investigation on our end. You'll begin by reviewing the questions that you hope to have answered through your community assessment and start thinking about where you might access them. Consider the following avenues. First, we have our existing program indicators, and this represents the data that's already been collected and stored by our organization. Don't overlook what's readily available to you and don't reinvent the wheel. Make sure that you're including your organization's existing work. Next, we have local institutional data, and this includes data that's being collected by the public institutions in our area that can help us better understand the problem we're addressing. This includes public entities like local city government, school districts, and law enforcement. Now, some of this information may be available to the public and found in your city, county buildings or libraries, and others might be pieces of information that you would need to request. Finally, we have our partner organization data, and this is going to include the information regarding the community need that's being gathered by our partner organizations. Now, assuming that we all have our own piece of the puzzle, you can anticipate your partner organizations asking different questions and therefore holding different information than you. Examining what they're willing to share might help you better understand the need and your organization's role in meeting it. Now, it might feel uncomfortable approaching other entities and asking them for their information, but in my experience, it's always worth seeing if they're willing to share it. I've personally had good luck with that approach and have only been turned down a handful of times, usually due to a restriction on behalf of a funding source or client privacy concerns. Now, during this process, you might find that there's a specific piece of information that's missing, information that could help you better understand the problem, but nobody's collecting it. Now, view that as an opportunity and take note of it in your assessment. Perhaps this is a role your organization can play in the future. Now, as you begin to look for community indicators, you might notice that your efforts are overlapping with the process of learning more about community member experiences. So let's go ahead and jump into that. The final type of data to collect is some of the most important that you'll gather, and this is the community member experiences. This is where you will use tools like surveys, focus groups, interviews, and observation to get a better sense of what people's lives look like day to day, what barriers they perceive, and what services they feel they need. The goal in gathering data about community experiences is to gain additional insight that will help you interpret the information you obtained when looking through your statistics and indicators. Now, that information is pretty meaningless until you talk directly to the people who are experiencing those circumstances, as well as the people who are serving those populations alongside of you. They know their stories and they understand the complexity of their experiences of poverty in your community better than anybody. And this is where the notion of intersectionality really comes into play. While you might be able to articulate the housing issues in your community, and you might be able to pull a figure that tells you how many people are receiving meal assistance, until you truly understand how those two things operate together for real people and what factors might be driving them both, like lack of jobs, you can't begin to think through the solutions. This is an extremely important principle for you to understand and takes us back to the community assessment mindset. Don't lead with solutions. Be neutral in your approach and genuinely listen. Now, I recognize that many of you may not have been involved with soliciting community member experiences using these tools before, and that can feel super intimidating. The truth is, we could do an entire webinar series on those topics alone. So with that being said, I want to show you another useful tool that can help you learn more about these specific activities involved with soliciting community member experiences, in addition to most all the topics that we've covered here today. So the Community Toolbox is an online tool developed and managed by the Kansas University Center for Community Health and Development. It contains 48 chapters worth of information relevant to community development, including community assessment. Each chapter has an overview and a step-by-step guidance, along with things like case studies and videos, checklists, and templates. It is chock full of best practices and easy to adopt tools. I cannot recommend it enough. Folks, I've been at this work now for almost 20 years, and I still reference this site all the time. When you visit the site, you can search specifically for tools to assist you in soliciting community member experiences, including how to host a focus group, how to design surveys, and how to conduct interviews. So take a few minutes and check those out. I would specifically also recommend looking over Chapter 3, Assessing Community Needs and Resources, and the Assessing Community Needs and Resources Toolkit. It's going to be a deep dive into what we've covered today. Now, before we move on, and this question was asked at the beginning of the webinar, I want to acknowledge how COVID-19 and dealing with life during a pandemic can make gathering information about community member experiences more challenging. When we think about activities like focus groups and interviews and observations, we tend to think of those things as occurring in person. And there's no doubt that we tend to connect more authentically when we're sharing physical space, but that doesn't mean we can't do this work effectively using technology. For examples, interviews and focus groups are both things that can absolutely take place in a virtual setting, and sometimes they're even better. Platforms like Zoom, Google Hangouts, and Microsoft Teams offer a variety of options like polls and chats and breakout rooms that can be used to enhance the user's experience and keep their engagement. And you might be surprised at how many more people are willing to participate in those activities when they can do so from the comfort of their own home. For surveys, you can use tools like Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, or SurveyGizmo to reach your intended audience, with added benefits like built-in analytics and automatic reporting formats. Now, as you're utilizing these new technologies to navigate this new world, don't forget to also be listening for the new community needs that are emerging. I do work for an organization called Eagle Mount, which does adaptive sports for people with disabilities. When COVID hit, they began reassessing ways to deliver their mission, and they were running virtual focus groups with their participants and families to see what they could learn. What they discovered is that while there were ways to continue to safely run adaptive sports programming for some of the participants, many were too vulnerable to be in public with other people. So they brainstormed with them and began designing virtual activities in cohort groups to ensure that they stayed connected with each other and continued to learn new skills. They're several months in, and that new initiative is still a success. So I'm sure that many of you have come across similar circumstances. Chris, I'm going to kick it back to you. Why don't we find out more about what our VISTAs have learned about their communities in the times of COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like some that already kind of prompted some questions coming up in the chat. So yeah, let's hear from everyone and in this chat question. So in the past several months or since you started serving as an AmeriCorps member, Have you learned about any changing needs in your community as a result of the pandemic? So any changing needs as a result of the pandemic, ideally here, we'd like to hear from you. So again, just a friendly reminder on to toggle all panelists and attendees and let us know and share what changes you've seen through the pandemic as you've served in AmeriCorps. So looks like they're starting to come in now. Job insecurity, isolation, food shortages, lack of participation, social isolation and mental health impacts, lack of Wi-Fi and lack of technology, more unemployment. Oh, this is so depressing, but it's important. You know, we're asking this for a reason. We want to see what you're experiencing and what you're seeing in your communities. And COVID, no doubt, has had a major impact. The pandemic has had a major impact on our country and the world. So yes, please keep these coming. Job security, lack of skills, money, interest, enthusiasm. Seen a lot of this. Childcare, yeah, that's huge. Transportation, lack of internet again. Yeah. Whew. Shannon, do you see any specific ones here that have stood out to you?
I mean, I think what we're all seeing is those basic human needs, right, are kind of returning to the forefront. They've always been there and always been important, but I think that COVID has just brought those things really front and center for all of us again. Yeah. And I would add too, Chris, I think that what we're somebody says Zoom fatigue. I feel you. We're here though. I think I would add that really this highlights the importance of doing community needs assessment that much more and recognizing, you know, now we say it all the time, now more than ever, but really things are changing so rapidly that it's just critical that we are, you know, continually in this process of looking at needs and seeing what we can learn because it's just changing so quickly. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Chris?
No, I would just, you know, just a note. Yeah, keep the chat coming. But yeah, let's just because we're looking at time, we should probably move on to the next slide. But thank you everyone for sharing those. It's much appreciated.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, folks. So the next step in your community assessment is to organize your key findings and set your priorities. Before driving into this process and this task, I want to make sure that I am as clear as possible about your need to complete this phase in collaboration with others. Do not, and I repeat, do not organize your key findings and identify priorities on your own. It is crucial that others are assisting you with this task for a variety of reasons. First, as a national service member, you've got to remember that you are a visitor to these communities. Your insight and your ideas are invaluable. However, final decisions on how to move forward will lie with your organization's leadership and members of the community. Your role is to support the process designed to enhance their capacity to make decisions and make their work easier, not to lead their efforts. So focus on the process, not the outcomes. Next, despite our best efforts to remain neutral, our brains are designed to develop biases and to seek information that confirms those biases. You and anybody else who's reviewing the assessment results will have pre-existing ideas and preferences that your brain will automatically tilt towards when reviewing the data. Involving multiple people in the review process ensures that there are checks and balances in place to prevent these preferences from being given more weight and attention than they deserve. Finally, I often like to say that all of us is better than one of us, always. By inviting a diverse group of individuals to participate in reviewing the data, you're modeling inclusion and drawing out a variety of responses, insights, and ideas. Support creativity and innovation by assuming that everybody holds a piece of the puzzle and aspire to leverage as many perspectives as you can. If you're unsure of who to involve in this part of the process, begin by speaking with your supervisor. If your supervisor is unsure, you might suggest considering other organizational staff and board members, key volunteers and beneficiaries, or other community stakeholders. Okay, so now that we've covered that, let's discuss how we go about processing the information. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we can make these tasks very complicated or we can keep it simple. Again, I'm going to steer you towards a simple model that I use for a variety of activities called what, so what, now what. The what, so what, now what framework comes from the field of experiential learning and is useful in a variety of scenarios when we are attempting to make sense of new information. So let's go ahead and break that down. What is the first step and is designed to help you organize and describe your findings? This part is pretty straightforward. Think of it simply as a summary of your activities. You'll begin by documenting the scope of your assessment using the information we covered earlier in the session, including naming the problem, identifying the questions you intended to answer, and defining the community that you assessed. Then outline the various data collection activities you utilized. Include the data sources that you accessed, the beneficiaries and stakeholders you contacted, and the tools that you use to collect information, such as surveys, interviews, or focus group questions. Finally, document the information and data you found through the course of each activity. Be extra thorough here and format that information in a way that feels accessible and digestible to others. The next step, so what, is designed to help you understand what the data is telling you. So this is where you'll begin to interpret your findings, generalize the themes, and identify what you've learned. Again, ensure that there are multiple people bringing a variety of perspectives to the table during this step. So you'll start by clarifying what you've learned about the problem. Include data points you pulled to further define the problem, along with the unique attributes your community faces that you discovered when you were going through the course of your other assessment activities. Then you'll conduct what is known as a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The SWOT analysis framework is a simple and straightforward way to move through your findings and begin generalizing what's been learned. You'll start your SWOT by listing your community strengths and summarizing the information that you obtained regarding the resources and services currently at play in your community. The intention here is to paint a comprehensive picture of what's being done to address the problem so that you can ensure you aren't duplicating services. You'll then move into identifying your community's weaknesses. This represents where there might be a lack of resources, a gap in services, or inadequate service delivery. You'll likely obtain this knowledge through the information you gained when looking at local indicators and exploring community member experiences. Finally, look over the community's strengths and weaknesses side by side and identify the opportunities that are available to further address the problem and the threats that might need to be contended with when you're designing new solutions. Now, again, if you'd like to learn more about the SWOT analysis, there's lots of information online and in the community toolbox specifically. Once you've got your SWOT complete, it's time to organize your organization's priorities and next steps. To do this, you'll begin by reviewing some of your organization's core documents, such as the mission, vision, and values, a strategic plan, and funding requirements. Once those have been considered, center yourself with the following questions. What's already being done to support the work and address the problem, and what gaps exist? What are the greatest needs, and what are the opportunities that are available? What is our mission and vision and for the future, and what are they instructing us to do? What's our staff's capacity? What skills do we possess, and what can we take on, and what can we do to make the greatest impact? You may need to circle around these questions a few times before you gain clarity, which is okay. Take your time and be thorough. If you continue to find yourself at an impasse, it might be because you need to answer another question or gather a new piece of data to move forward. That's also okay, and it's actually quite normal. The process isn't linear, and I don't recommend moving forward until you have all the information that you need to make decisions. All right, folks. So the last piece is as easy as it is important. You must remember to communicate your next steps back to the community. This community will include everybody in your organization. So staff, board members, advisors. And then you also want to make sure everybody understands what the work was completed and how it's being used. Next, share with your partners. Chances are their input and support will greatly inform your assessment. So you want to make sure to share with them how that information was used to identify priorities and let them know what your next steps are. Finally, communicate your findings and next steps to the stakeholders and beneficiaries. Now, I talk more about this in my Demystifying Stakeholder and Engagement webinar, which you can find on the VISTA campus. But just understand that reporting back and loop closing with our constituents is an important way that we show respect and promote buy-in to our work. Communicating back to the community is so easy and intuitive that it's often overlooked. So don't forget this essential step. All right, so we're nearing the end of our time, and I'm just going to take a quick minute to recap the key points from today's session. First, remember to set your mindset prior to beginning your assessment. Be curious, don't lead with solutions, and don't make promises. Next, take time to define the scope of your assessment. Frame the problem, identify the community you're assessing, and think critically about the beneficiaries, partners, and stakeholders that you'd like to include. Begin your assessment by gathering data. Look at relevant federal statistics, seek local indicators, and provide community members with a variety of avenues to share their experiences. Review your data with a team of people using the what, so what, now what model, and identify your priorities using a SWOT analysis and your organization's core documents and values. Conclude by communicating your next steps to all the individuals involved with your assessment. And remember, the success of your project is dependent upon your alignment with community needs. When your project doesn't seem to be catching steam, return to the community, find out what you're missing. You guys, thanks again for coming out today and listening in. It's been an absolute privilege. I hope you got what you were looking for. And thank you so much for your service. We really can't tell you how much it means to know that you're still out there doing the good things. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to our host.
Thanks, Shannon. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And actually, we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A, but as you see on this slide, we also want to reach out and ask that you just take a couple moments to give us feedback on the webinar. We are constantly reviewing the content and looking for recommendations for future webinars, and I want to know what worked, what didn't. So yeah, if you can, please just take a couple moments to complete the evaluation. There's a link in the chat right now for it, and it should pop up as you close out of Zoom too. But thank you in advance for your feedback. And we will take a look at some of the questions that came in. And feel free to enter more questions at the moment. We'll try to get through as many as we can in these last few moments. So, Shannon, let me ask you, I got a good question here that came in a little earlier. So, I believe this was with regards to the define the scope part, where we're identifying and framing the problem. And the question is, do you have a strategy for naming the problem if it may not be clear, or if people in my organization do not agree on what the problem is?
Yeah, I saw that one, and that is a tricky one. So it's kind of complex. But some things that I would suggest, as silly as it sounds, that but why activity, and it's formally called 9 whys, can be a really helpful place to begin, right? So, well, why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? And see if you can get the members of your organization to come to a similar conclusion. So I would genuinely try that out, see if the why is helping you. If you truly cannot get there, then what I would say is that it sounds like your organization may lack a strong theory of change. So theory of change and logic modeling can be fairly interchangeable terms, But I would say that one of the best things you might be able to contribute then as a VISTA to support them in capacity is getting them to work on constructing a theory of change, so they're clear what problem they're addressing and what their vision for the future is.
Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, I know that is a tough one, and a lot of tough questions coming in. So we're going to hit you hard, Shannon. We're going to take advantage of you while you're here. So another one, how about, do you have any suggestions on how to handle negative feedback from a rural community about a project?
Oh man, handle it like a champion, right? That's what we want to hear. This is going to sound, here's the thing, Vistas, this is part of what makes your role so awesome is like you get to come in there. It's not personal for you. It's not something that you have a long institutional connection to. So if there's a negative perception in the community, that's information we want. And I would say if it's, you can't see me, I'm using air quotes for the word negative. So if you're hearing quote unquote negative feedback, see how you can support the community and turning it into something constructive, right? So I always like to say, hey, we can sit around and admire this problem for as long as we'd like, but how do we solve it? So again, leverage your neutrality and as a VISTA and the fact that these aren't things that you're institutionally attached to. See if you can get people to give you that negative feedback and coach them in making it supportive. So instead of just being critical, tell us what we can be doing differently. That's actually great relationship building, man. Go get that negative feedback.
Thanks, Shannon. And a really good one and a popular question here. How does one go about recruiting community members for interviews and focus groups, especially remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that you want to start with the existing contacts your organization may have. So this is where, again, you're going to look to beneficiaries, current volunteer base, folks who have served as advisory, on an advisory board or who are serving on your board of director or partners. And then what I like to say is utilize what's known as a concentric circle strategy. So start with the people that are always going to say yes to you and are within an arm's reach, and then ask them to reach out to somebody who is within arm's reach of them, so on and so forth. So, we know that putting out flyers and Facebook messaging and posts, that's not going to work. You got to work with who you know. So start with the people will say yes, ask them to reach out and engage the people they know will say yes. And that's actually how this work is done. We feel bad like we're overtaxing people, but that's actually just how the work's done. So concentric circles, start with who you've got, get them to twist the arms of the people they've got.
Awesome. So probably have time. I know there's a bunch of questions coming in. We can squeeze in at least one, maybe two more. I see a good one here, Shannon. So it says, my organization is small and I would likely be the only one involved in a community assessment, but I don't want my biases or ideas to get in the way. So how do I navigate that? Maybe certain biases one might have if they're an individual working on the assessment.
You bet. So a couple of things. Number one, folks, this is why being a VISTA is so cool. So wherever you are, I know there are other VISTAs around you. There are other VISTAs in the project. So truly, if you are like, hey, I'm a VISTA and we have a 20-hour-a-week executive director and it's just us, define the scope and do all that and utilize your peers. Have them look that over, right? Give them feedback, see where they might have something to add. So utilize your peer network in setting it up. And then you absolutely need, people from your organization to help with the so what, making sense of the data. So again, as a VISTA, your job then is to make that as easy as you possibly can, right? To facilitate that experience for them. So use each other to kind of define the scope and check your biases, use your peers. And then when it comes time, that there's, limited resources in your organization, make that as easy as possible for them, and say, here's the one document, and I would like you and the board and these 5 volunteers to look over and give me your insight. So the easier you can make that piece for them, the better, and that's the piece you really need them.
Thanks, Shannon. And I'll try to squeeze in one more question. I know we're getting towards the top of the hour. And here's another big one, another tough one for you, Shannon. How do you create a strong community needs assessment when you serve beneficiaries with high stakes confidentiality concerns? So for instance, undocumented individuals and domestic violence survivors. Do you have any guidance or recommendations on those confidentiality concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to reflect back that I have actually done needs assessments for the local domestic violence community. So I'm well aware of how dicey that information can get, right? So again, start with the federal statistics, then see what you've got locally. And all you're trying to do is demonstrate like, hey, we have a larger problem in our community we need to pay attention to, or we're doing well in our community and we need to keep going that direction. I have done private autonomous focus groups for a variety of different entities involved with the domestic violence community. So again, just being very clear that like privacy, your name will not be mentioned. What's said in this room stays in this room. And then as I'm pulling those reports together, I'm going straight to themes without anything specific, no identifying factors. And then, if there's folks who have something to contribute, but are just uncomfortable doing so directly, you can go as far as to setting up an online survey that does not track IP addresses so that folks can give you feedback in a way that's untraceable. So just know it's very possible. And I appreciate the question because it's quite nuanced. And again, we could do a whole session on it, but it's possible to do.
Right. Yeah. Hit you with that tough question. Answer it all in 30 seconds, Shannon. Yeah, but thank you for those answers. Okay, so we've got about a minute left, and we just have a couple closing slides here. And we want to thank you for attending this webinar, and we certainly hope you can join us for our next webinar next month and improve your giving and receiving feedback skills, which we'll have on Wednesday, November 18th from 2 to 3 p.m. And a general reminder, because we saw several questions coming up in the Q&A as well about a recording for this. So yeah, we'll have the recording and the handouts posted to the VISTA campus. There's a VISTA campus webinars page, member webinars, and that's also where you can go to register for this upcoming webinar as well. We should have that registration up shortly. We hope to see you next month, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you for serving as an AmeriCorps VISTA and your participation and all that you do in your communities. We wish you all the success in the world this year. Shannon, I want to thank you as well for everything today. Just great. So this will conclude today's webinar, and again, thank you all for your service.